Well, time now to speak to the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, and get his views on some of the stories of the day. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for coming in. Actually, first of all, I want to talk about the announcement you're making today. You're talking about having countryside coppers. You want a countryside copper guarantee. Explain what that is.
Well, rural crime is really serious, affecting many communities. Livestock theft, equipment theft from farms, hair coursing, which is seeing organised crime gangs damaging crops and threatening farmers and their families. And there's not the police there to deal with it, with the technology to deal with it. And we've done an analysis asking the police services in England and Wales how many officers they have dedicated to these types of rural crimes. And it's really shocking. It's less than 0.5% of police resources are dedicated to these crimes. So we're saying that's wrong, and in areas where there's particularly few resources, places like Devon and Cornwall, they've only got 4 police officers. That needs to be changed, and they need to have new technology, things like drones, to help them do their work.
Obviously, incredibly distressing, anyone that's caught up in that kind of crime. But what is the rate of rural crime compared to urban crime? Well,
it is lower.
And do you know what the rate is?
I haven't got the exact figures, but clearly there's lots of serious crime in urban areas. I represent a suburban constituency, and we're worried about crime that is very serious. But I don't think it's an either-or. And what we're saying today is if we got rid of police and crime commissioners that cost quite a bit of money, and we put that money into tackling rural crime, we could afford to get the officers with the technology to clamp down on these sorts of crimes.
You say not either or, but it does make sense, does it not? If the crime is higher in urban areas, then proportionally you'd have the number of officers, you have a higher proportion in cities.
Yeah, no one's saying that we shouldn't have officers in the cities. Of course, we need it, and probably more. We need more community police officers to crack down on crime in urban areas. However, I'm afraid too many governments in the past, Conservative and Labour, have made that argument and therefore taken away resources from our rural areas. We want to reverse those sorts of cuts to make sure that this rural crime is treated seriously. It's just frankly wrong that we have organised criminal gangs terrorising farmers and rural communities.
You talk about the problems with police numbers. Don't those problems go back to the coalition government, of which you were part, which in 2010 decided to cut police numbers?
Well, I think most of the problems have started in recent years. And frankly, you're talking about a long, long time ago. I think since...
But that's where the problem started, wasn't it?
No, not at all. I think that the Conservatives, since 2015, they were in power for 9 years, failed to invest in our police, and particularly in rural areas, which is what we're talking about today.
The Scunthorpe steel plant has now received the much-needed raw materials to keep it going, keep the furnaces alight after the government intervened and took over the plant. Do you accept the government's done a good job in rescuing it?
Yeah, I think they have. We supported them when we came back on last Saturday for their plans. We said we would scrutinise them, and we want to make sure that they don't take too long to do this and use these powers for too long. However, let's give credit where credit's due. The Chinese company involved was behaving quite wrongly, and the government were right to take the action they have.
And the government says it's looking for another private partner to run the business. They appear to not be ruling out another Chinese partner. Do you think they're right to have that kind of approach?
I would caution them against that. I think they need to find a different type of partner. There's a real danger, and one of the worries that I think we've all had is the Chinese firm might have been under orders, being influenced by the Chinese government. It's in China's interest that we don't have our own ability to make virgin steel, that these blast furnaces were to close. So I think we should push back against that. And I really hope the government won't go down that route. You know, there are other options, I think. We would argue that steel should be seen as a strategic national asset. That would mean that the orders would come through more through public procurement, whether it's in the energy sector, the defence sector, the transport sector, the construction sector. That would make sure that British steel was more viable in the long term, and I think, therefore, could attract private investment. And if necessary, we've not ruled out the option of nationalisation, but I think there are options open to the government if they designate steel as a strategic national asset.
On the question of China's influence, any progress in determining why your MP, Wira Hobhouse, was refused entry to Hong Kong?
I'm afraid not, and I think this is quite worrying, really. We've already said that the UK government should call in the Chinese ambassador for a proper explanation of what happened. We've had some reports from the Chinese authorities trying to blame Vera, which of course is completely outrageous, and we've called on the Chinese to publish any transcripts or any recordings they have. I think that will find that Vera's account is right. Let's remember, Vera wasn't even going on a political visit. She was visiting her newly born grandson. She was going on a family visit. And it was quite wrong of the Hong Kong Chinese authorities to do what they did. And I think it's right that we, as not just the Liberal Democrats, but as MPs, as a country, demand a full explanation.
I want to turn our attention to the United States now, because the Vice President J.D. Vance yesterday said there was a good chance of a great agreement on trade between the US and the UK. Sounds promising?
Well, if we can get a good trade deal that's in our country's interests with the United States, we would support it. What we've said is any deal should come before Parliament, so MPs can scrutinise the details.
That doesn't always happen, does it? I mean, the Australian trade deal that was struck didn't go before Parliament, did it?
No, it should have done. And indeed, the Labour opposition then said it should have done. So I hope they're going to be true to their word when they're in opposition. Other trade deals have done. For example, the trade deal that Boris Johnson did with the EU. So I think it'd be right for this trade deal to come before Parliament. I think it's essential, frankly, particularly when we hear rather worrying reports that the government may be willing to do a deal with Trump on agriculture, potentially undermining standards, food quality standards in our country and British farmers. They've talked about relaxing our rules on online safety for children. That would be unacceptable. So there are areas that we absolutely must scrutinise, because any deal is not good enough. We need a good deal that's in the national interest, that doesn't undermine our farmers and our children's safety.
So you want to vote on this because you want to be able to vote it down if you don't like it?
Yeah, or push the government to make amendments. What we're also arguing, though, and let's be clear, is that in order to get a good deal, we need to show that we have alternatives. And my major criticism of the government's approach to President Trump is that they've not shown a tough side. And what do I mean by that? Let's organise an economic coalition of the willing with our Commonwealth partners like Canada, our European partners and others, countries like Japan and Korea, so we can maximise free trade elsewhere and say to the Americans, look, you shouldn't be trying to divide and rule. You shouldn't be picking us off one by one. You should be treating your allies with greater respect.
Well, you say you want them to take a tough approach, and yet the approach that Sir Keir Starmer's government is taking appears to be working. We were given the lowest level of tariffs in the first place, and now J.D. Vance says that a great agreement could be on the cards. Isn't their approach working, rather than being tougher, as you say?
I wish he was. But our biggest export to the United States is cars, and we have a 25% tariff on our cars, like every other country. The 10% tariff that we've got now applies to everybody, not just the UK, so we've got no benefit there. And they're now talking about increasing tariffs on pharmaceuticals. That's another major British export to the United States. So it doesn't appear, on the evidence that we actually have, the tariffs that have been announced, that Britain is getting a special deal. Now, would be more than happy if the government does get a deal that's in our national interest. Of course I would be. Liberal Democrats are the free trade party. But I have to be sceptical. President Trump, in his attitude to defence and security, whether it's NATO or Ukraine, has proved to be an unreliable ally. He's put tariffs on our car industry, on British exporters, and therefore I'm not going to apologise for being rather sceptical of J.D. Vance and President Trump, and arguing that we need to seek alternatives. The Liberal Democrats have argued, for example, for a new customs union between the UK and the EU to get rid of some of the damaging bureaucracy and red tape that the Conservatives have put around our exporters, which has been damaging our trade and growth for some time now. And we need to be tougher.
OK. I won't get into the subject of Brexit right now because we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question because the UK Supreme Court will rule today over whether or not the definition of a woman in the Equality Act includes transgender women with a gender recognition certificate. This is originally a case brought against the Scottish Government. How significant do you think that ruling is?
I think it will be significant. Let's see what the ruling actually says. What I hope it will do, though, is take some of the temperature out of this debate. We've seen a lot of hostility from both sides, and I don't think that is good for dealing with an issue which is genuinely difficult, which is genuinely sensitive, and I hope that hostility can be removed, and I hope the court decision helps that.
OK, well, Ed Davey, we appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks
very much indeed for joining us.